The Challenge Cup returns this weekend with top and bottom of the table clashes. My name's Mark. Let's talk rugby. Europe's secondary competition returning this weekend. As a competition that obviously has issues in terms of the gravitas that it has compared to the Champions Cup, but generally in these rounds, round 3 and 4, you're going to see the teams that are seeing opportunities here and are going to take it more seriously, and you're also going to see the teams that have just decided, let's just give up on this, focus on our league, get a few young players out there for a bit of experience, etc. So you're going to see the whole gambit of that this weekend. But what we'll do as normal is going to go down through each of the games, talk about how the teams have done so far in the competition, and also make a prediction for those games. So going to start with the early games on Saturday. So the first game, Saturday 10th of January, 1 o'clock kickoff. All times are Ireland or UK times, so check your local listings for that. But this one is at the Stade Jean Bouin, and it's Stade Francais Paris versus Exeter Chiefs. And before this competition started, this looked like this clash here looked like two heavyweights really going head to head. You've got Stade Francais normally would be on that cusp, I think, between Challenge Cup and the Champions Cup, whereas Exeter, until they completely changed, revamped their squad, were getting to even semi-finals of the Champions Cup. So it's certainly two of the bigger names, I think, in this competition this year, and they're facing off in this one. In terms of how they've done so far in the competition, so Stade Francais, they're 2 from 2, and they've got a perfect record as well. They got bonus points of both of those. The only team in the competition that has 10 points from their opening 2 games. So first up, beat Cardiff by 21 points. Then they beat the Cheetahs by 23 points. So pretty comprehensive wins in those ones. Exeter then, by contrast, they beat the Cheetahs by 30 points, but then they drew against Racing 92. And Racing were coming off the back of a defeat into that game as well. So Exeter, I think they're going to qualify for the knockout stages, but obviously they would have liked this one to be kind of two teams with perfect records going head to head, but it didn't kind of work out that way for them. These two guys in their pool, they are in pool 3, and they're 1 and 2 in the pool. So certainly, and you probably expect them to both finish in the top 3, I think, in the pool. I think whether it's going to be both top 2 probably depends. Well, really, it's Ulster and Cardiff, right? If either of those can get a run in the last 2 games, they might force their way into that top 2. But at the moment, these are the top 2 teams in that pool, and you feel like the winner of this game has a really good chance of coming out on top in the pool as the number 1 coming out of there. And then it's interesting as well, because you've got these 2 teams are both 3rd in their respective leagues. So Exeter 3rd in the Prem now, as they call it, instead of the Premiership, and they're 4 points behind leaders Northampton. And then Stade Francais are also 3rd in the top 14, albeit I think they're 9 points behind Toulouse at the top there. So a bit of a gap there between them and top spot, but still going pretty well. And from 3rd down is a bit tighter, there. compared to like the Prem. At least in the Prem, you got like 1 point back to Bristol, 2 points to Leicester, and then 7 points down to Saracens. But yeah, both teams, in decent form coming into this now, across the season, and it's one of those ones where when it becomes tight to call like this, you kind of lean towards the home advantage. I think the home advantage will count here as well. So I think Stade Francais will get the win, but Exeter will definitely make it difficult for them. I expect Exeter to maybe get at least 1, possibly 2 bonus points out of the game, but I'm going to go for a Stade win in that one. So that's your top of the table clash to start with. Then we have a bottom of the table clash in Pool 1. So in here, 1 o'clock kickoff at the Stade Sapiac, and it's US Montauban versus Black Lion. So both these teams have lost their first 2 games, and yeah, it basically, like, obviously they still have a chance. There's still 2 games to go, so they still have a chance to qualify. But if they've got any ambitions towards that, they really need to get their skates on. So Montauban started off, lost to Zebre by 24 points. Then they lose to Ospreys by 11 points as well. Black Lion, they lost to Montpellier by 11, and then lost to Connacht by 52. So neither team really producing, even a performance, really, I would say, over the first 2 games. And now they both have a chance to get a first win on the board. I would say that if had Black Lion gotten some kind of, maybe losing bonus point or something against someone, or if they hadn't just got absolutely destroyed by Connacht, then I kind of fancy them, just because Montauban have been in poor form in the top 14 as well, to possibly get something out of the game and maybe have a chance at the win. But the fact that both of them are coming in on poor form in this competition doesn't really stack up, I think, in that regards. Montauban, they're bottom of the top 14, but at least they've got a win and a draw so far this season there, and they're only 2 points behind Perpignan as well. There is a massive gap though between Perpignan and Lyon in 12th place. But yeah, I can't say that Black Lion have enough momentum coming into the game for me to predict them to win away from home. Like, they might, I think in their final game, like, they might produce something. But at the minute, you look at the pool as well, Pool 1, and these 2 teams, 5th and 6th with 0 match points, and 4th place is Zebre with 5 points. So whichever team loses this game is pretty much out of the competition. The winner will have basically given themselves a chance to kind of go into a bit of a shootout in the final round to potentially qualify. But that's it. Like, they're not going to be, they're not going to be like guaranteed progression or anything like that. But the loser, I think, will definitely be eliminated from the competition. And again, depending on how the teams see it, that could have an effect on it as well. Because again, Montauban struggling at the bottom of the top 14. Do they really need to have extra games where potentially players who could be vital to their kind of their struggle for survival getting injured in this, and is that going to play into how they pick their team? But also you have to think about the top 14 as well, kind of momentum wise, where first of all, would actually getting a result here give the team a bit of confidence, and that momentum carries over into top 14. But also, do you want to rest your top players for the last 2 rounds of this competition, knowing then that when you get to your next top 14 match, that players won't have played for 3 weeks, and that's and they could be rusty and stuff like that as well. So there's a lot of factors at play, I think, here. And then also Black Lion as an invitational team, for them, this is kind of in terms of their season, they have 4 games in this competition to really kind of put themselves in a bit of a spotlight and to show what they can do and what, Georgian rugby, at club level is all about, because we know the Georgian national team, and yes, a lot of those guys play for Black Lion as well, but, to be able to just showcase themselves and potentially get some kind of progress in terms of development, and not have to have players, leaving Georgia and playing in the top 14 where Montauban are, etc., for the national team, as well. So that again is another factor in this. But I think on the balance of everything, just because both teams have been in really poor form coming into it, it's hard to see Black Lion suddenly going away, even against a team who have had a bad run themselves and suddenly producing a performance. So I'm going to go for a Montauban win in that one. Next game then we have Newcastle Red Bulls versus Perpignan. So, Newcastle have been a bit of a revelation in this competition, honestly, because, when this competition started, they were rock bottom of the Premiership and hadn't won a game all season. And then they go and they win 2 games. They win their 2 games in the opening rounds. And because of that, they're pretty much through to the knockout stages. It's going to take, some strange circumstances, I think, for them not to qualify. Obviously, it's still mathematically possible, but you would expect that they're going to pick up enough points over the last 2 rounds that they will get into the knockout stages. And you have Perpignan, who, had kind of a mixed first couple of rounds, a win and a loss. So if we look at how those teams did over those, so as I said, Newcastle won their 2 games. So first of all, they beat Lyon by 9 points, which is a really good scalp to take, especially given you look back at the history over the last few years of Lyon in this competition, and it's getting to finals. I think they lifted the trophy a couple of years ago as well. So it really was like a bit of a shock that they were able to do that, because Lyon are one of the French teams that take this competition seriously, and they're not up to the level of Champions Cup, to be properly competitive. But in this competition, generally they are. So that was definitely a bit of a shock. And then they backed it up then by beating the Lions as well. So some really good performances and good results from them as well. Again, a team that was rock bottom of their league and being able to do that. Now, still, they are rock bottom of the Premiership, but they have at least gotten a win in that competition since then and have closed the gap to Gloucester above them as well. At the moment, they sit on 5 points at the bottom of the Premiership, Gloucester on 9 points. So if they could muster another win from somewhere, the potential, at least for them in the Prem, to climb off the bottom is there. They've got, as I said, Gloucester 4 points ahead of them, and then Quins only another point ahead, only 5 points ahead there. So it's not like they're completely adrift at the bottom there. And obviously, again, it's one of these things where you may be struggling domestically, you get a bit of confidence from performances in Europe, and it carries over to domestic affairs as well. So I think for them, given all the changes that they're making there, with new investment, etc., any kind of confidence that they can get in their squad is a massive plus, I think, for them. Then Perpignan, so they started out, good win against the Dragons, 24-point win in that one. but then they lose against Benetton by 13 points. But, Benetton, are a really good team, especially at this level. Like Benetton, another one of those teams that are kind of on the cusp between Champions Cup and Challenge Cup. So no shame, on Perpignan losing to them. And again, Perpignan not doing great in the top 14. They're currently sitting 13th in that competition, only ahead of Montauban, who we just talked about, and well adrift of Lyon, who were the team above them. Like they're 18 points behind Lyon in 12th place. So they really are kind of scrap for the lives there with Montauban at the bottom. But they've certainly had a better, made a better fist of it than Montauban in the first couple of rounds. But yeah, this is going to be, I think, a tough one for them, going over to Newcastle against a team who have performed in the first couple of rounds and have a bit more confidence domestically as well. And, at the minute, they're second and third in the pool. But, if Newcastle win, then almost certainly Perpignan are going to drop down to probably 4th or 5th in the pool, just based on the fact that, a couple of teams below them are probably going to get wins, over the weekend. So, and then Newcastle will be looking to put pressure on, Bennett's on top of the pool. They have an opportunity to get a win here, and whether Benetton win or not, at least they keep the pressure up on them. And yeah, looking at it, given the fact that Newcastle have been 2 from 2 so far, it's hard to look beyond them in a home game that against, again, a Perpignan team who haven't been brilliant in the top 14 and have had a kind of a mixed record in this competition so far this year. So because of that, I'm going to go for a Newcastle Red Bulls win in that one. Then we have another clash in Pool 2. This is at the other, those two guys kind of towards the top of the table. These two towards the bottom of the table. It's 3:15 kickoff at Ellis Park. It's the Lions versus Lyon Olympique Universitaire. And yeah, both of these teams lost their first 2 games. And it's another one of those ones where, lose this game and you're not necessarily eliminated from the competition because there's another team in the pool who hasn't won either, but still you're not putting yourself in the best position to potentially qualify. And we look at the results of the teams. So so the Lions, first of all, Emirates Lions, they lost to Benetton by 8 points to start, and then beaten by the Bulls by 4 points. So close in both of their games for them, and it just feels like they need just that little bit extra in their performance, and they can get a win. The fact that they're home in this one again, I think is going to be a big boost for them. Lyon lost to Newcastle by 9 points, and then lost to the Dragons by 2 points. So both teams close in their 2 games so far. And you feel like this is going to be another close one, but I've with the Lions, the Lions have some fantastic players, and the problem with them really is that they find it very hard to kind of be consistent. And if we look at the results so far this year in the URC, I think all of their wins actually come in South Africa. Most of them at home in Ellis Park, but I think they went to the Bulls and won right as well. So haven't won in Europe, but they're in South Africa for this one. And yeah, you would think that they've at least a decent chance of pulling off a win in this one. So given that, kind of the relative between the two teams, Lyon are, again, not doing great in the top 14. They're down in 12th place. The Lions are, let me just pull up the table for the URC. Pretty sure they're kind of mid-table. Yeah, they're 7th place in the URC, so they're in the playoff place at the moment in the URC with 4 wins from 4 so far in the league, and that compares to Lyon, who've won was it 6 of their 14 games so far in the top 14. So I think again it's the whole home advantage, and also the Lions always have a decent performance in them at home, and they're one of those teams where there's a really big contrast between their performances at home, especially like when I say at home, not just at Ellis Park, but also even when they go to the other South African teams in the URC, and then compare that to when they come up to Europe. They seem to struggle more than the other South African teams, especially when you think of the Bulls and the Stormers over the past couple of years, and then the Sharks are kind of the Sharks are a team where you think how can those guys not get their act together? But the Lions, they're really the one kind of South African team from the URC who haven't really shown themselves, I think, in the best light so far. But for this particular game, I think they're going to win, so I'm going to predict a Lions win in that one. Next, then we move on to Pool 3, and this is also at 3:15. Cardiff Arms Park. It's Cardiff Rugby versus Racing 92, and Racing 92 have been somewhat surprising in this competition in that they're generally a Champions Cup team, and you would expect them to be more competitive than they have been in this competition this year. But again, it's one of these ones. I think teams like Racing, when they're in that position, they can get one good result, get into the knockout stages, and suddenly start finding a bit of form. And that might happen to them still in this competition. But so far, in terms of their results, so Cardiff, they lost first up against Stade Francais by 21 points, but then they bounced back and they beat Ulster by 3 points, and they actually came from behind to beat Ulster. And that, for me, that was a significant win for Cardiff, because they were having a bit of a wobble in terms of their form at that point, and they had another bit of a wobble over the Christmas period in the URC as well. And now it's a chance for them to kind of re-establish that confidence in a squad. There's a lot of young players in that squad. Yes, they do obviously have some old heads in there as well, but kind of I think the overall squad profile is certainly on the younger side compared to a lot of other URC squads. And they've been doing pretty well in the URC so far this season. They're at the moment they're in 4th place. They were up in 2nd place before having that kind of dip in form over the Christmas period, while they're playing the Welsh derbies. But again, I think they have enough kind of in the bank to be able to rediscover that confidence. If they get a decent start in this one, I think they could do pretty well. Racing, by contrast, they started off with a heavy loss to Ulster, losing by 54 points, and then they get that draw against Exeter, which for at least it gives them something to build on. I think in terms of just where they are in the pool, and also gives them a choice in terms of they know if they can get something out of this game and then win their final game, they're probably going to be qualified for the knockout stages. And then it's about what kind of team are they going to send over to Cardiff, and also with Cardiff, because Cardiff have had that different form. Even if Racing send over a fairly weakened team, there's no guarantee for Cardiff that Cardiff are just going to stroll through the game and win. I don't think they're at that level at the moment. despite, sitting fourth in the URC, but certainly you would make them favourites for the game if that was to happen. But at the minute, Cardiff sitting fourth in the pool, Racing in fifth, and it's not quite an elimination, but you would feel that the winner certainly goes into the final round with a much better chance of appearing in the knockout stages, and especially I think if it's Cardiff. If Cardiff win and they go up to, let's say they don't even get a bonus point, but they go up to 9 points and Racing don't get anything out of the game, well, they've already then opened up a 6 point lead to them, and potentially this weekend, depending on how results go, we could see 2 teams eliminated from this pool in terms of the competition. That being Racing, and the other one, the Toyota Cheetahs, depending on how their own game goes against Ulster, which we'll talk about in a minute or two. But yeah, looking at it again, I think Cardiff have certainly had the better season between the two. Racing at the minute, they're sitting 11th place in the top 14, and they've been down around that area for much of the season, whereas Cardiff, by contrast, have been up near the top of the URC for much of their season. And given that, I've got to go for a Cardiff win in that one. On to the next one then, and it is back to Pool 2. This is a 5:30 kickoff at the Stadio Monego. It's Benetton Rugby versus Dragons RFC, and 2 teams who have had kind of decent enough performances so far in this competition, especially compared to how they've been doing in the URC. You got like Benetton, for me, haven't been up to the level that we've seen them kind of, if you go back about 2 or 3 years. At the moment, they're sitting in 8th place in the URC, so just about in the playoff places. But they've been very inconsistent this year. The Dragons, at the minute, 13th place in the URC, and they're only actually 3 points behind Benetton in the table, and they've had a real resurgence over the Christmas period, and that's helped them climb the table. They climbed from, I think, second bottom up to 13th. It doesn't sound like a lot when you think like going from 15th to 13th, but when you look at it in the context of the Dragons, and the Dragons over the time that they've been in the URC, like they've pretty much been 15th or 16th in the table for almost that entire period. So for them to be able to move up the table in that way, just shows that there is something happening there with the Dragons, and they are improving, which is brilliant to see. If we look at the results so far for the teams in the competition, so Benetton, they've won 2 from 2. So, they beat the Lions first up by 8 points, and then they beat Perpignan by 13 points. The Dragons started out, heavy loss against Perpignan by 24, but then really good win against Lyon by 2 points in the last round there. So definitely gives us something to build on. And in terms of where the teams are kind of sitting in their pool, so you've got Benetton there at the top on 9 points, and then Dragons are in 4th place on 4 points. So the Dragons, I think the Dragons realistically probably looking to get something out of the game, at least some kind of bonus point out of the game, and then win their final game, and that should be enough to take them through to qualification. If they don't get anything out of the game, then going into the last round, it's probably a case of they have to win, and some other result is going to have to go their way. Whereas Benetton, on the cusp of qualifying for the knockout stages already. I think that they're pretty much going to be through anyway. But a win here would definitely seal the deal for that. And after that, then they'd go into the final round. looking towards, what's the seeding going to be for the knockout stages? Can they get, home advantage, that kind of thing? And with that in mind, I think, got to predict the Benetton win out of this one. But, it'd be nice to see Dragons get something out of the game in terms of a bonus point. Okay, so on to then the Sunday games. So the first Sunday game is 1 o'clock kickoff at the Septio Stadium, and it's Montpellier versus Connacht Rugby. And normally these two teams are pretty competitive in this competition. Don't think Connacht have been as competitive as they've been in previous seasons. But again, Connacht are another one of those teams that are very kind of hot and cold in terms of their form. And we look at the form so far in this competition. So Montpellier, they beat Black Lion by 11 points. Then they beat Zebre by 24. So two really good results there, leaving them on 9 points in the pool. Whereas Connacht, they lost to Ospreys first up by 3 points. And then that big win against Black Lion by 52. But if there's going to be that kind of contrast between their home form and their away form, it's going to be a bit more difficult for them to get it into the knockout stages, and they probably will get there, but will be away, I would say, in the round of 16. And if we look at where these teams are in their domestic league, so Montpellier at the minute, they're sitting in 6th place in the top 14. So pretty decent from them. Like, they're ahead of teams like La Rochelle, Clermont, and Castres, and Bayonne as well, all in the Champions Cup this year. And then they're just behind the likes of Toulon, Bordeaux, and Stade Francais, just 1 point behind them. So they've had a decent season so far. And other than Pau being second place, just 1 point behind Toulouse, they probably would be seen as the kind of surprise package of the season so far there. But certainly having a decent season domestically. And then we compare that to Connacht, who at the moment are sitting 12th in the URC. Again, had a bit of a dip in form. They've only won 2 of their 8 games in the URC so far. And they need to find a win from somewhere, in some competition, I think, to spark a bit of confidence. They, had the interpros against the other Irish provinces not going so well for them. And it's stretching back now over 2 years since they won one of those. So just having non-Irish competition may be a bit of a G-up for them. But the fact that, again, they're going away from home and they're not in the best of form at the minute. And Montpellier, having that 2-from-2 record, I've got to go for a Montpellier win, but I will absolutely be cheering, Connacht on in that one. But I'm hoping Connacht will surprise us with one of their crazy results that we didn't think they had in them. But we'll see. Then in the same pool, also on at the same time, 1 o'clock at the Stadio Sergio Lanfranchi, it is Zebre Parma versus Ospreys. So an all URC clash in this one. And Zebre had a very good start to the season and included winning their first game in this competition, but they've severely dipped in form since then. And they're, going against an Ospreys team who've had a bit of a resurgence in form. But first of all, let's look at their form in this competition, and then we look at the domestic form. So Zebre, they started off with that win against Montauban by 24 points, but then they follow up with a loss to Montpellier by the same margin, 24 points. Ospreys, as I said, won their first 2 games, beat Connacht by 3 points, and then they beat Montauban by 11 points. So, decent from them. And they're on the cusp now, another win or even like, you know, I would say another bonus point for them is probably going to be enough for them to qualify, whereas Zebre certainly have more to do. But we look at, you know, where the teams are sitting in the EuroC at the minute. You know, Zebre, after winning like 2 games right at the start of the season, have now lost, I think, 7 on the trot in the EuroC, and have slipped all the way down to 15th and only above Scarlets at the minute. Whereas Ospreys have climbed, I'm pretty sure they were the bottom or second bottom of the table at one point, but now they've climbed their way up to 9th place, you know, and they're right on the border there into the playoff spot. So they've had a real resurgence. They've had very good kind of Christmas, New Year period with the Welsh derbies as well in the EuroC, and that's gone really, really good for them. And, you know, the fact that they have also done well in this competition, you know, thinking that Ospreys, for me, Ospreys are probably slight favourites for the win here. You would hope that Zebre at home, you know, are going to be competitive. Ospreys, though, the weird thing is, I think Ospreys are favourites, but I think that kind of favourite tag isn't going to sit all that well for them in this regard, and therefore I'm actually going to predict a Zebre win in that one. Now we come on to the final game of the round. So 3:15 kickoff on Sunday. It is at the NRCA Stadium. It's Toyota Cheetahs. You know, they were in the what was it called? Before they were in the EuroC before it was called the EuroC, right? And it's a pity that they had to leave when the other South African teams joined. Because it would be great to still have them there, but they're the other invitational team in this competition, and hasn't been going great guns for them so far. Ulster have been going really well in the EuroC lately, and they've had a bit of a mixed start in this one themselves. So we look at kind of the start that these two teams have had. So Toyota Cheetahs, they lose to Exeter by 30 points, and then they lose to Stade Francais by 23, so not coming close to either of those teams. And then Ulster, they beat Racing 92 by 54, albeit a weakened Racing team. And then that loss against Cardiff, which was a bit of, you know, not a major shock, but certainly a bit of a shock, I think, given how well Ulster, not only how well Ulster were doing in the league, because Cardiff were doing well in the league as well, but how well Ulster were doing in the game. And then, you know, Cardiff took it away from them. But I think, you know, Ulster have improved since then. And, you know, in this one, like, again, Cheetahs, they are an invitation team, so they don't have, they do have like domestic stuff like the Currie Cup and stuff, but they don't have, you know, domestic league that they're playing in, at least that I'm aware of, in terms of it being a high profile. And then Ulster, at the minute, they're sitting in 3rd place in the EuroC, 6 wins from their 8 games, and yeah, they really hit some good form. They're, you know, the attack, it really is looking sharp for those guys, and we're seeing things like set piece and defence coming into line as well for them. And it's an away game, but, you know, Cheetahs just haven't been up to much so far in the competition, and because of that, I'm going to go for an Ulster win. Okay, so that is our look ahead to the weekend rugby. So, you know, I've already got one for the Champions Cup, so you want to go check that out. That's up on the channel. And in terms of covering games, you know, it's hard because for whatever reason, the organisers decide to put so many games on at the same time. It's difficult to cover games in this competition. So I think most of the coverage that I will do for the weekend will probably be Champions Cup games. But if I can, I'll try and get, you know, one game. It will probably be one of the Irish provinces. So either Ulster or Connacht, but that depends on what other games are on at the same time as well. But either way, whether your team is in this competition or in the Champions Cup, I hope you know that you enjoy your weekend of rugby watching. It's always great, I feel, when you have so many games on at the weekend. It means that, for me at least, I can watch some just for myself watching it, and I may not cover them because it can get very kind of wearing if you are covering, let's say, 3 or 4 games in a day. You're just going basically like, one game finishes, you have to record the review of that, and then you're working on that at halftime in the next game, and yeah, it can be difficult. But I'll cover as many games as I can, and I hope you guys enjoy the weekend, whatever you're up to.